This is Jim Pfaff, president of the Conservative Caucus. I just wrapped up a discussion with Victoria Cobb of the Family Foundation of Virginia. Victoria and I have known each other a lot of years back in the day when I used to work with Focus on the Family as a national representative for family policy councils. She's been working in Virginia for about 25 years now with the Family Foundation, doing a lot of things. We talk a little bit about what's going on with the church and with the pro-life, pro-family movement, particularly in Virginia. We kind of give you a little bit of a background of what Virginia politics is like and why that's important nationwide. And we spent a little time as well talking about a progressive agenda that has been going through the church nationwide, as well as how that's been playing out for her in Virginia. So you'll want to listen to this. It's a great interview, and please leave comments and like and share this video and this podcast, and make sure you follow us as well. Now, to connect with us directly, go to our website at theconservativecaucus.org. You can send us a message there. You can contribute to our organization if you'd like to be helpful with us there. But definitely click on the share button, and you can learn how to get active in your community, and you can learn a whole lot about what we're doing, because we send out information regularly. And any guests that you would like to hear from, you'd like to hear me talk to, or any topics you want us to cover, give us that feedback there as well. You can also send us an email at info@conservativeusa.org. Let us know what you'd like to see. And while you're at our website, just make sure that you get onto our Citizen Action Kit and do the register button, the sign up button, at the top right corner. With that, here's my conversation with Victoria Cobb of the Family Foundation of Virginia. Hey, so glad to have my friend Victoria Cobb here. She's from the Family Foundation of Virginia. And I'm telling you, we've known each other for a lot of years, although recent years we've been kind of going slightly different directions and then running into one another. But she's been with Family Foundation of Virginia since 1999. It's been a long time. Of course, when I was at Focus on the Family as a national representative for family policy councils, we got to know one another back in 2005. And she's really been one of the great advocates in the pro-life, pro-family movement, and frankly, fiscal conservative movement for a lot of years. And Virginia's a tough state, very wild circumstance. Like, it's not as bad as you think, and it's also worse than you can imagine. And it's a very, very interesting place. But Victoria, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to connect with you again.
Yeah, it's been great. It's great to do it. And hey, listen, Victoria, what would you say is the state of politics in Virginia, not just as it relates to the family, but maybe more broadly and in general?
Yeah, I think people need to understand sort of the makeup. We are a very narrowly divided state, but if one side wins, that means they win it all. It's kind of this weird. So there have been moments where we have been fully Democrat controlled top to bottom. That was a couple of years, 2019, 2020. But then there are times where we've had split. So right now, for example, our statewide offices are very conservative Republicans, but our legislature, which the House side is 100 seats and 51 of them are Democrat and 49 of them are Republican. And the Senate is 40 seats and it's 21-19. So it's like one seat either direction. But what you find in Virginia is that because we're so close to DC, that you don't just get your run-of-the-mill Democrat. You get the absolute hardest left-wing crazy. And I think it's because they come out of these advocacy locations where they're not just Joe Schmo running, they've run the ACLU or some, I don't know, I can't explain it, but we get California plus bad ideas. And so when they have control, it can devastate the state very quickly. It's not like we go part way. And then when Republicans tend to get control, they're very, I think we tend to run, I gotta be kind here. We run a more cowardly Republican than some areas. And so,
kind.
there are standouts. So we're not naming names. There are standouts, but at times we don't have even when we have control, we inch forward backward, inch back towards where we lost when Democrats had control. So it's a weird dynamic. Our U.S. Senate seats are both Democrat, and then Congress, we don't have enough Republican congressmen. So it's just kind of a big messy mess. So it's a weird dynamic.
Yeah. And now one of the reasons you're able to have that dynamic is because your elections run on the odd years.
Correct.
Which, you're one of two states in the nation that do that. New Jersey does that as in the state legislature, as well as Virginia, because you're both Commonwealth states. There are 4 Commonwealth states, Pennsylvania being another, and Massachusetts as well. But it's just interesting, of the Commonwealth states, you run on these odd years, and it in a way insulates you from the national politics that really does dominate the state out.
It is interesting because in some ways it insulates us, in other ways it exacerbates it. So, for example, this is a governor election year for Virginia. We're going to have our election results in large part driven by the immediate backlash of whoever wins that presidency this past year. So because it has been President Trump, we almost always, it's almost 100% record. It's not quite perfect, but we just almost always swing the opposite direction with our governor race, which is very devastating when you think you're on a roll and there's this stuff going around the country and you're going, wait, what's going on? There's this mood change and there's more conservatives. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, but wait, we're going to react. It's just a bizarre situation. So we're hoping that we break that this year, obviously.
Yeah, well, and you're still trying to work through Republican candidates. So
correct.
There could be
who knows what we will.
Potential weakness there, and frankly, some weaknesses seeming to show up. And not to disparage any particular people, but that's the challenge too. You also have this
one-term governor, which is an interesting thing that people don't think about. For your audience, just so you know, Virginia is one of these states where people might know that Governor Youngkin is our governor now. He's done a good job for 4 years. He's actually favorable in all the polls, but he can't run again. And that's just not your situation in most states. So he has to take 4 years off. He could come back after he sits one out, so to speak, goes on the bench and then comes back, but he can't do it in a row. And so it's like, even when you're tracking the right direction, you kind of have to constantly restart.
Yeah, it's a one consecutive term state, which should seem even odder to folks. And also, the way national politics does play in it is you have people who are ambitious who want to get involved in Virginia politics because they're also connected to the national politics via Northern Virginia. But what's interesting about that Northern Virginia thing, which really, honestly, Virginia, if things were even, should be a light red state at worst.
Correct.
Because what exacerbates it is you got 6 of the 10 wealthiest counties that surround Washington, D.C., and the reason for that wealth has nothing to do with free market economics. It has everything to do with government contracts, government employees, and the lobbyists that make a lot of money as well that work around that area. You go down.
There's a reshaping right now, and that's going to have huge impact on Virginia. One of the things, it's been interesting to watch these Trump elections because Virginia has been more anti-Trump than expected or than other states. And it's because in Virginia, in Northern Virginia, even the Republicans are part of the system. So if you have a disruptor, it's disrupting Democrats and Republicans in the Northern Virginia area, and they're worried about their contracts. They're worried about their lobbying. They're worried about all the things. And so it isn't something where it's uniformly just affecting, one side of the aisle. And so now with sort of the different layoffs and stuff, we're going to watch how that all shakes down. Ultimately, if some of this wealthy area that you're talking about that is so populous, if some of those people actually don't end up, see, what typically happens is if you lose a government job, you go to the private sector, then you contract with the governor and you really haven't lost anything. You've just, circled round and round. And that typically happens. If truly jobs end up disappearing under this administration and people don't find themselves recirculated, then people may end up moving out. It could have a net positive long-term effect on Virginia. Short-term, by this November, It's probably a lot more people that are really unhappy with what's going on. So we're just kind of up against some odds that are especially challenging right now.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I want to get your thoughts on something, and we'll certainly keep dipping back down into Virginia because that's kind of your wheelhouse. But you're like me. I mean, we're following what's happening nationally. Those trends obviously seep into Virginia a little bit more than other states, not entirely, but a little bit more. So I want to get your perspective on something, because here we are in the Trump era. Like over the last 10 plus years, this has really been the Trump era when it comes to conservative politics. You know, you and I have worked in the pro-life, pro-family movement for a lot of years. Those people are really connected into Trump because he actually has, even though there have been a couple issues, we don't have to get into it, but a couple issues on the life issue related to him. By and large, he's been very pro-Christian, pro-Jewish, pro-religious in general, and then pretty pro-life and pro-family. I mean, it's a net very positive record.
Yeah.
So our folks that we had been around as we were working in the pro-life, pro-family movement are there. Fiscal conservatives of the more traditional conservative sort, they're definitely tending towards Donald Trump, although you've got the TDS, Trump derangement syndrome wing. And then in this election, you had some kind of maybe blue collar Democrats and minorities, as well as libertarian minded people that kind of came along with Donald Trump. It's a really unique broad coalition. It's where we're at right now. In the midst of all that does remain these serious issues on life and family that you and I have always been very passionate about. What would you say, in your perspective, is the state of the pro-life, pro-family movement nationally?
That's such a great question because, of course, we're in this post-Roe. If we look at the life issue, for example, we're in this post-Roe era where it's like finally one of the big hurdles has been overcome, because until you overturned Roe, there was really the sense of how far could you really go in a state. So in one sense, you've got that. Then you've got the backlash to that. So all of that has nothing to do with who's in office, but just a reality of once you had judges. So that was Trump, obviously, that gave us judges that looked at it from a constitutional perspective. But the cultural reaction is sort of just a reaction to that, and people sort of coming to grips with, we have had 50 years of this. What would the country look like without abortion? I think it's been wonderful for people to, I mean, there was a time where I'm not sure people could imagine what a state could look like without abortion. I think they just didn't have it just had been the law of the land long enough that, so what's really wonderful is being able to see some of these states move all the way to really respecting human life at its most important moments. And so at least now we have a visual, this is how it works. And so that's a huge gain overall. And I think when you get to the family side of things, I see, and we've had other elected officials try to head in this direction. I can think of Rick Santorum, for example. But, J.D. Vance is regularly talking about root causes, not just symptoms. He's talking about the value of family, that the children are good and a blessing, and some of the things that set the tone for really truly changing viewpoints on things like life and marriage. And I think that's where we've got to go. There was just a period where that wasn't out there enough in our elected official vernacular. They weren't talking about that. They might talk about abortion, but they weren't talking about children as a blessing and families, like that we need strong families, that we need these nuclear families. It was sort of like it got out of vogue for a while. And I think we have a good moment where we have some folks trying to bring that back. And I think there's really a resurgence of acceptance of that. It's just how deep and how long is that going to run? Just looking at the younger people and sort of the trad wife trend and some of these young men being more conservative than they've been. That's an amazing thing to watch, more young men coming back to the church. So we're seeing lots of good signs. And I think having leadership that espouses some of that is truly helpful, because we're not just sort of running into roadblocks, and we're not just talking about the symptoms of the problem. We're actually getting to what is it that makes our society good, and why have these things worked, and trying to kind of get to fundamentals. So that is a really healthy place. Now, It's not to say that there aren't challenges to the pro-family movement right now. Of course, the backlash with Roe, I mean, we can't deny that states are struggling to be able to protect human life in this environment where people, basically the left will throw millions and millions and millions of dollars at the most extreme example, and they will convince the public, if it goes to a ballot box anywhere, they'll convince the public that if there's an 11-year-old girl that is raped, that somehow if you don't vote for all abortion all the time, you won't be able to ever have any abortion. And there's very few states that will get to the point where there are no exceptions to abortion. I mean, that is just we're not where we are yet as a country. We have to value life first. We have to value family. Like, we're so far from that. But they will convince anybody that this is an all or nothing proposition, and it rarely is. And so, there's real challenges in our movement as well. But hopefully we're ready for them.
Yeah, I mean, the most emotional arguments for abortion come, there are a lot of areas of emotional arguments that can get to people, but
sure.
the most emotional ones are rape, incest, and life of the mother.
Absolutely.
If we restricted abortion to only those exceptions, which is not my stance, but I'm just saying, if we did, that all of a sudden you've got less than 5% of current abortions happening.
That's right.
And you're addressing the most critical things in people's minds. Again, there's more to it.
Of course.
It goes broader than that.
Well, and in Virginia, we're a very permissive state for abortion.
Yeah.
It's truly devastating. I mean, we do allow it up until and including the third trimester. There are some parameters around it at the very end, but even those are very weak. And
by the way, even a former governor that was willing ostensibly to kill them when they're just out of the womb.
And it's more than just that. People do remember Governor Northam's statement, and that was really the low point of Virginia, was the 2 years where he was in charge and the legislature would follow his bad ideas. But also, this isn't that old. We just this year, we have a constitutional amendment moving forward from the left that would, again, unlimited abortion for anyone at any time by anybody. It's a horrific thing. But, we tried to have our side actually try to amend it. And they tried to simply say, let's make sure that in this constitutional amendment, we're clear that if a baby is born alive, that if in a botched abortion, a child is actually born, they have the legal protections. And the Democrats said no. So we still are actually battling that issue in Virginia. And if you read the newspaper today, had an article about it, and they'll say that's because that's kind of current law. Well, a constitutional amendment, as we all know, is the new standard once you put one of those into your constitution. And so it's silly to think that if you say abortion cannot be restricted in any way, shape, or form, then you have to be very careful what that means. And there's no downside to double protecting a child that's born. So we're still actually having those ridiculous battles in Virginia that should never have to be. If it's not happening, if it's already protected, no harm done. Put it in the new constitutional amendment, but they won't.
Well, and all that is because of Northern Virginia.
Correct.
Yeah, you'll have a little bit of that in Richmond, maybe, but and maybe in Norfolk, but
small pockets.
But that's a Northern Virginia thing with national activists injecting themselves into state politics in that regard, and National Abortion Rights Action League, ACLU, all these people that are really whacked out and crazy on
many
this.
Very headquartered right here. So you can imagine, it always takes every political battle to its sort of professional level, and I just don't think it looks like that in the same way in other states. And so, we have to rise to the occasion. And that's just the challenge for our side, is to rally in the same way that the left does when they want something.
Well, so moving to another similar of these issues, you get into the education situation. We're having also nationally a huge discussion on education, with Donald Trump pushing for the elimination of the Federal Department of Education, which, by the way, is an unconstitutional department. There's no authorization for Congress to do anything like that. And finally, someone was willing to make that happen. Linda McMahon is Education Secretary, and she's working towards that elimination, which Donald Trump did by executive order, and there are going to be lawsuits on all that. But education is really critical right now, too, because whoever educates the kids controls the country, really. And we are in a desperate situation ideologically right now, after more than half a century of really radical inputs in education, particularly through what the teachers unions have done. So, and one of these areas, and I was just talking with my board member, Dick Black, who was down in Richmond recently talking to home educators. And I know that you work with that situation in Virginia. What's the state of the education debate right now? What's happening in Virginia? How do you see this nationally?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize homeschooling was almost birthed here. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's older than our Commonwealth, but the really the laws protecting homeschooling and not letting the government be forced into that educational situation was very much, sort of created here, homeschool legal defense housed here, and all of that. And yet, and we have great laws on the books about it, but in today's era, with the kinds of liberals that we have in our legislature, we did have an attack on homeschooling just this year, and it was specifically going after homeschoolers who use what we call the religious exemption. All that does is say, look, we are home educating for the purposes of our faith. Basically says we're accountable to God, not the government, for educating our children. Therefore, we're not going to abide by your standards and turn in whatever you want us to turn in, because this is between us and God. And there's a very small pocket of people who actually fit that. And all the kids educated, it's something like 6,000 kids. And across Virginia, that is a very small number. And yet, there was a piece of legislation to try to completely eliminate that, to say, nope, government has to be involved in every step of the way. And thankfully, the homeschoolers rose to the occasion. They rallied at the Capitol. They emailed their legislator, and it was a great success case where even when you have liberal Democrats in charge, they heard so much noise. And remember, it's not just conservatives that homeschool. Homeschooling has become very broad-based for a lot of reasons. People are realizing this education, this building that I was assigned to simply because of my zip code, that doesn't work for my kid. And so, they heard from their constituents, and they actually, thankfully, the Democrats actually pulled their own bill. We were worried it would have to get to our governor, who is solidly conservative and would have vetoed it. But he was able to defeat it earlier. But education is a struggle in Virginia because our teachers union have a very tight grip. We've been working on educational opportunities for everyone for decades. And we're still very, very narrowly out of the box. I mean, it's just, we have a very small tuition tax credit program that allows a small group of children to get a scholarship to be able to find a school that fits them better, but it is not what it needs to be. The donation incentive is only 60 cents on a dollar to create those scholarships. That's really how you create educational choice, is you incentivize people to donate. Because, I mean, I tell people, Virginia has educational choice now. If you're wealthy, you can choose wherever you want, move in the right school district or put your kid in a private school. But we do not have fair educational choice for anybody who doesn't have the income, the ability to pay for it. And so we constantly are saying we've got to encourage the funds, because when it's done through tax credits, you don't have the strings attached. The money is just flowing for the child, through the child. It's not coming down from the state with a whole bunch of strings. And so we have a long way to go in Virginia because, again, we have a teachers union that drives it, and we have Southwest Virginia Republicans, that's the rural area of Virginia, where they think we don't have private schools in large quantities. There's not, unlike everywhere else in the state where people are banging on the doors and need more space in private schools, Southwest just isn't that case. And typically the public school in rural areas is a big employer. So legislators feel beholden to it and to the teachers union. And we end up, even when we have enough members of the GOP who theoretically espouse educational opportunities, we struggle to actually get movement on our policies.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about that, those more rural communities that don't have private schools and the potential threat to employment in the area. And it's like, well, but that's not a problem because you still got to educate the same number of kids. So someone's going to be employed somewhere.
Well, and also if there's really not a bunch of private schools and all that stuff, people aren't going to take advantage of it. If they're happy with their public schools, they will stay. Yeah. And people are actually in more rural areas. There's less wokeism. There's less ideology. They more likely are going to say, oh, some Christian families going to go, well, my kid's teacher is a Christian. It kind of works out. The public, I know the principal on a first name basis. It's really in cities like Petersburg, Virginia, where it's economically not strong and it's left-wing run. And so you get this ideology and you get an inability for parents to make a move for their children because they can't pick up and move. They can't pick a private school. So it's really, that's what we're talking about, is for the kids that really need it the most.
Yeah. Listen, if we don't change the course of education in this country, we're not going to be able. I'm already worried about sustaining the positive aspects of the era of Trump. But there's no way to sustain that 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road if we also don't get a handle on education. We need
It's not a coincidence that the higher your degree is these days, the more left wing you're likely to be. Why
Correct.
is that? Because we are literally indoctrinating at the collegiate level. And so if we don't start getting that stuff out, we're just literally allowing the left to rewrite all the values that are instilled. And yeah, that's going to ultimately become an unsustainable cycle.
Yeah, I was just doing a media interview today. And we were talking about the recent moves on tariffs and stuff, and how that might mean with manufacturing. But one of the things that can come out of that is much more emphasis on the trades. And, Mike Rowe has been pushing this idea for a long period of time, which I endorse, by the way, that not everybody needs to go to college, but that's not what the left wants. They want everybody going to college and getting their underwater basket weaving degrees, because then they indoctrinate them into something. Whereas if someone goes to a trade school, there's not a lot of time for indoctrination. You're just trying to make sure you do the weld correctly, or understand how the air conditioning machine, this massive air conditioning machine works that you're going to be putting on roofs. But the thing is, there's economic opportunity in these areas, and we need to also push for that, because the education system is totally controlled by the left, or those that aren't quite so leftist are influenced by the radical left and are too weak or cowardly to do anything about it. I was amazed, Victoria, after COVID in 2020, that Republican legislatures around the country did not go all full school choice education directed by the parents and never by the state. That was a perfect opportunity. Everyone saw how bad it got, the way that the schools were acting during COVID. They got by that without losing their political connection to power, which should have been eradicated, at least in red states. This is very disappointing, even in a place like Virginia, which at the time,
we weren't fully Republican at the time, and so we were stuck a little bit. But I do think that helped usher in Governor Youngkin in 2021. He didn't come in with a perfectly workable legislature, but the mask off thing was very much a part of the parents' push that I think did make a difference, because we had such craziness. That sort of last 2 years of Governor Northam was liberal top to bottom, and that was right around when COVID hit. And so we actually had very extreme measures around education, and a lot of kids did not get educated. And to this day, Virginia is one of the worst states in making up the educational losses that were sustained during COVID. So we literally can look back now with data and say, yes, this Commonwealth was making all the wrong decisions around education. And it's amazing that even no matter what your party is, when the data is that bad, you should know better, and you should be moving in a direction of a really sharp correction.
By the way, 25 years, 26 years almost, I guess, that you've been doing this there. What's changed in Virginia from when you walked in the door to now? Has much changed, or is it pretty much the same? What's your take on that? How would you characterize it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in some ways it's not that different than what we've seen in the nation, which is, so I started the very tail end of 99 as an intern and then full-time in 2000. So yes, right about 25 years of real work here, and I would say that we were at the time Republican controlled, but we were not socially conservative. It was a bunch of rhinos, for lack of a better word. It was people who didn't like the social issues. So we struggled to get any strong policies passed. Then we sort of went through an era of some Democrat governors and some Republican legislatures. So, you do this. Virginia likes to think of itself. If you ask these people that have lived in Virginia for a long time, they like to be moderate. They like to think of themselves as independent, and they like split governance. And so often we have a governor that doesn't reflect the legislature. So it's actually rare moments where either party can sustain big ground. We did have some time under our Governor McDonnell, so we had a short era. But I would say nationally, what I do see is that both parties are more tied to the actual principles of what they believe than they were back then. Meaning, if you find the average GOP lawmaker in Virginia, they're going to be a little bit more socially conservative than they were back in the early 2000s in Virginia. Same though with a average Democrat. In the early 2000s, we had blue dog Democrats. They had a big view of government, but they were morally where you and I would stand on abortion, on marriage, on all those things. That's just not the case in Virginia anymore. You can't get elected on the Democrat ticket. It's not that there aren't those people out there. It's that you couldn't get to office because the special interests are Planned Parenthood, Equality Virginia, which is the leading gay rights organization. That is who makes or breaks your run. And so both parties are more to the left is further left and the right is further right. The divide is bigger. There's a lot less bipartisan anything that passes the General Assembly. And I think that's actually what I tend to feel like I'm seeing nationally in a lot of ways is just, I would say, you look at our speaker, super conservative, socially kind of guy. That hasn't always been the case with our speakers of the House, So in some ways, the party in power is putting forward more people that espouse more of the full principles, but it just makes the divide that much stronger. That's where you end up with State of the Unions, where everybody looks like a clown reacting to the messages delivered on the left. The left is up there with their signs and they're walking out or whatever, because it's just such extremes.
Yeah, it is. Have you had success during that time period, and how has it changed pastor engagement and church engagement in Virginia?
Well, it's so important that the body of Christ be standing for the things of righteousness, right? Like that is just such an important principle. And it is a struggle. It has always been a struggle to get the church involved. It waxes and wanes. So when the church, and I'm using it very collectively, so of course there's exceptions. And of course, this is not fair to characterize the whole thing, but when there feels a threat that feels very personal, that it would directly affect the church, I see pastors step in and they start engaging. When it feels a little bit more not going to affect my exact church, then it's hard to get the pastors to rally. So in Virginia, we had something called the Virginia Values Act, and it was the exact opposite of what you would think that is, because we know what values are. But what they were putting in was literally a non-discrimination code of the sorts that would actually mandate that churches and Christian schools couldn't hire and fire according to their own principles. That basically you had to non-discriminate on LGBT questions even in how you conducted business. And that was sort of before some Supreme Court decisions and whatnot. But nevertheless, that's an era where I saw the church step up and step in because they actually themselves were going to be affected by the law. What's challenging is when you have issues like abortion, where, okay, it doesn't directly affect the institution of the church, but it affects the image of God on human life, right? Like this is everything that we believe is that God has created every human being with dignity simply by the fact that the Creator made them and has this plan for them, right? So the church should be stepping into that. But if they can be told by the secularists that this is an issue of politics and not Bible, it gives them a little bit of an excuse. So we are doing tons of pastor engagement all the time. We are actually just next week, we hit the road and we do 8 events with pastors from Richmond out to the far Southwest. So we went one direction a couple weeks ago and did about 8 events from Richmond to the east side to the beach. And now we're going the other direction next week. And it's really pastor gatherings, breakfast, lunch, to share with them what they really should know is happening in the Commonwealth. And those are 2 big things. One's a constitutional amendment on abortion. They want an unrestricted right to abortion. And the other one is a repeal and replace of what we put in our Constitution about marriage. And we have a traditional statement in our Constitution. And of course, the Supreme Court has overridden that with Obergefell. So we have same-sex marriage functionally in Virginia. But what they want to do is not just pull the words out. They actually want to replace the words. And now, instead of saying marriage is this beautiful thing between a man and a woman that has rights and obligations and benefits, and that's kind of what's in our Constitution now, they basically want to say it's between any 2 people, and They pull out all the rights, benefits, and obligations kind of stuff. And they actually say it's between any two people of any sex or gender. And by putting those two things as separate concepts in a fundamental right, we believe they're trying to put transgender ideology right there into our Constitution, such that it would override our ability to block girls and, men and women's sports or boys and girls bathrooms. Those are the kind of things the church needs to know about and needs to be ready to speak to. Those are straight out of Genesis. But if we categorize those and say, oh, that's politics, instead of, oh, this is something that matters to the heart of God and it's going to truly harm our children. I try to remind pastors, for every issue that they think is political, it's affecting the people in their congregation that they are called to shepherd. When you talk about abortion, if you avoid that is an issue that you have a congregation sitting there, many of whom have been affected personally. They've either had an abortion, they've been a part of one, they know someone. They need to know God's heart on this in both the areas of what is right and good, and also in the area of ministry and forgiveness, in all the mercy that can flow despite that background. And it's the same thing with marriage. When we fail to say this was God's design and it is good for all the reasons, we also deny helping kids understand why a mom and a dad is so important, and that each one brings something different to the family. And when it's put together, that's going to give our churches the most stability. That's going to create the best environment for all of our kids to be able to, when they don't know what a good father is, it's really hard to understand what the good father is like, because if they've never had one in their home, they have to really get this concept from somewhere else. Why would we not speak about these things in our churches? So we're doing everything we can to help the church connect what they ought to be talking about anyway to the reality that these things do play out in the political space. And so it does matter that we engage.
I was just looking at something here. I could show it, but I guess I'm not going to. I saw a headline recently related to marriage here that there was some lady on it that says we need to eliminate marriage if we're going to save the feminist movement, or something to that degree. Like, it's a really radical statement. I wish I could find it quickly, but this is where all this is going. Like, I remember, way back in the early 2000s when, Massachusetts first had a court ruling that allowed gay marriage in 2002. And then we were off to the races trying to get marriage amendments passed to try to counter this, because we knew it was going to have national precedent. So one of the arguments was, hey, listen, if we go down this path, then where does it stop? I mean, now we're going to get into polyamory, or we're going to get into, are we going to get into even worse forms of marriage? And it's like, no, that is so extreme. It's just, homosexuals want to be able to marry. Well, now we're at this polyamory thing. We have real movements to go down that direction. And it's not safe for children. It's just not a good arrangement. It's bad enough the way we do things, but it's the same thing with everything. Now that these people have got the Obergefell decision, they want to eliminate any statement on man-wife marriage out of a constitution that doesn't affect them in any way at present, to entirely extract marriage out of the culture. I mean, that's literally the goal, because that's the only way. If you take these certain things out of a culture, then you can ostensibly make the argument that you're normal when what you want is not normal in the least.
Well, literally as of yesterday, our legislature had a battle on trying to insert the terms birthing people instead of women, pregnant women, in the code. There are truly efforts to say that it is not even exclusive to women, that we should be the ones recognized for birthing children. And so that's the world we live in. And that is the extension of the extreme feminism that they've created. That's not truly feminine, because they don't even know what that is. I like to tell people, if you follow leftist philosophy on this, all you're doing is saying, how close do I line up with the stereotype of what a woman is? If it's not biology, it's stereotypes. Do I wear enough makeup? Do I put on a dress? Yeah. That's all it is. If it's not biology, if it's not about birthing children, if it's not about your DNA, if it's none of that, it is literally, and that's why there's a spectrum. And the spectrum is literally just, do I do I line up with being a masculine looking, acting, whatever, or, male, or do I, all that. And so it's just truly sad that that's where feminism has gone, but it was the logical extension of the extremism of the concept that somehow women have to be completely not equal, but same as men. There's a difference between equal and sameness, and people, and the ERA was a big battle, and a lot of people know, but that's really what that came down to, was not just do women have equality when they do the same work, should they be paid the same? It was truly, are we in every way identical? And that actually does not help anyone. And that's what's really unfortunate. And when you get to identicalness, that's where you get to birthing people, right? I mean, if you have to be identical, I guess, nothing makes you unique.
Well, in reality, in all of life, practically and even logically, there are distinctions. Like the law of non-contradiction does work. You can't be A and non-A at the same time in the same relationship. Like there are contradictions, things that contradict one another. That's how we make distinctions. There are absolute, and science gets thrown out the door too, because there are absolute differences between males and females, psychologically, emotionally, physically, that are very real and scientifically bolstered. Like the obvious things that we know are there. We even have more data that makes it even more clear what those distinctions are. And so, and I remember Dr. Dobson in his book, Bringing Up Boys, making the joking comment that boys were actually have had brain problems because there literally is a hormone wash that goes into a male brain that separates the left and the right to some degree. I mean, it's a physical reality. So we know these things are there. So we've thrown away the science. We've thrown all these things away. And the church has always been something of a bastion of reality in this thing. But that's changed recently quite a bit. Yes. And what you were saying is a good segue into the next thing I want to talk about. I read recently, and I've gotten to know the author of Shepherds for Sale, Megan Basham. And Megan, who's a Daily Wire writer, made a fantastic discovery and explanation of why the church has kind of gone woke in these and other areas. And it's really because there is secular, frankly, atheist money. George Soros, Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, they're both atheists, and they're giving money to organizations that are influencing the church to go more woke. I mean, you go to Christianity Today magazine, Russell Moore, who was a disaster at the Ethics and Religious Liberty organization of the Southern Baptist Convention. I mean, he was making them go woke before he left. Well, Christianity Today, founded by Billy Graham, is one of the most woke, in a Christian manner, woke publications out there. And we're seeing this injected into a church in a certain way. Have you noticed that change happening in churches that you're working with? What's the effect of that? And how do you see this issue in terms of the things you're doing?
Yeah, it's actually truly devastating. And we saw it before we knew how to name it, if that makes sense. You could watch, and it started, I'm not going to get the chronology perfectly, but I would say when I started noticing it, it was a lot of things that were saying, you can't be truly pro-life if you're not also, and they would add all these other issues, whether it's immigration or,
right.
You name it. You're not
one of them as well, too, by the way.
And actually, you never heard, well, you can't be truly Christian if you care for the refugees, if you're not also pro-life, right? Like, so you never heard the reverse. All you heard, that was the early version of this, was you better also take on our issues. And it really did mute some people. All of a sudden people went, well, am I being hypocritical? And no, they weren't. They were passionate about this particular issue. So they were talking about this particular issue. You don't have to actually, no one is required by God's law or otherwise to have to all the time speak on all the issues, right? We think we are because we're in the world of internet. We want to believe the right things about everything. But yes, you can be part of a movement about a certain issue. But the left wanted to make sure we took their issues, and you weren't allowed to speak on right side things if you weren't speaking on, social justice-y things. So it started like that. And then you saw things like the big one that I saw in Virginia was the ampersand campaign. And it was a very clear, it had many things that looked and felt like, okay, this is, tracking, and then it would veer left. And if you read it, you had to kind of go one layer past the surface to start realizing, oh, this is tracking left. This is and it literally, I watched it pull Christians left. And then I watched pastors kind of go, oh, this is more comfortable. Like, I like being in this space because I can look, I can kind of bridge the gap between my Republican congregants, my Democrat congregants. And so you saw the effects before, I would say, books like Shepherds for Sale and others have started to track the money. And then you realize, oh no, I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist. So I have to wait till someone kind of proves some things sometimes before I'm willing to believe, like, tell me there's Soros money actually coming into the church. But no, in fact, there are the receipts. In fact, there is really this effort. And honestly, it's extraordinary because they basically went straight to the heart of the conservative movement and said, we're going to go inside and we're going to make these subtle moves and move it left. And it has been effective. I have watched entire churches move left. I actually can know, there are certain churches I know well enough that if I know somebody that starts going to that church, I will watch them politically move left. So don't tell me politics aren't happening in churches. They are. Wait, if you can literally watch someone move from right to left by changing churches, that church is in fact doing politics. It's just they won't do your kind of politics. They will only do the social justice ones or racial reconciliation. Yeah. And, for example, racial reconciliation is the most godly important thing out there. It's not that God's heart isn't 100% about that, but that doesn't mean you had to support the organization Black Lives Matter, right?
Right.
Like, exactly. But all that got all wishy-washy. And all of a sudden, if you didn't support the organization, you weren't Christian enough. And that was the move of the left trying to move the church. And we just have to be much more awake and wise about these things. And we've got to pray that our pastors have the discernment to not follow the trends, because the trends are driven. They are not just happening. They're being driven. And now we see exactly how. And it's just devastating. So
we talk about needing to be relevant in society. Well, that's interesting because actually what most of that discussion is pushing for is relativism in the society. In other words, we need to make ourselves relative to the society to be, connecting with people. And then they say this is for advancement of the gospel. This is for advancement of the kingdom. And it's not. You're actually taking in these very secularist, worldly ideas and bringing them in, and they're antithetical to the kingdom of God as it's as Jesus outlined it in Scripture, and as the gospel writers did too, and Paul. It's antithetical. Where our relevance to society is how bound up we are in truth. Another thing that has happened is that people take Romans 13 and try to make it out that, no, you shouldn't get involved in politics. Of course, they only say this to the conservative churches. The left-wing churches are highly involved in politics, and they're praised for their commitment to social justice and to being welcoming. Then you see this on the climate issue. They call it creation care. Yes. Well, of course, God says we're to take care of creation, but he does not say we're supposed to glom onto a quasi-socialist political ideology that has a government telling people what to do, when God said that our responsibility is directly to him, and that we just merely, when it comes to the magistrate, as it lays out in Romans 13, we're just merely to respect the outcomes of situations where one person is harmed by another. And that's really all that's being said there. So this is really seeped into the church too. And I see this nationally in things that I talk about. I'm out going against it on my social media platform. How are you seeing that aspect of it? I mean, why is it that I'm sharing why I think it, but what is your experience as to why you think pastors are telling their congregants to disengage from politics and from the cultural issues of the day?
I mean, I don't think there's any question that politics can bring about contentiousness, right? There's, you hear that, and I think it is fair that we are designed, God wants us to be at peace, but that doesn't mean he wants us to give up on right and good and true, right? I have to remind people, this is the hard thing. I think pastors have to remember this. Jesus, when he shared, I will just argue, because he was perfect, he shared perfectly. When he spoke, when he exposited the law, he did it perfectly. And people still walked away. And a pastor has to have that understanding, because if they don't, they will never speak about anything that ever would have an opponent view. Well, guess what? The gospel has opponents. It absolutely does it. The biggest one is Satan, and whatever he does to deceive everybody else. And so the idea that pastors are trying to, I think they're desperate to not create disharmony, but the gospel itself has to bring some disharmony because it convicts us. It tells us when we're wrong. That is the whole thing of it. Thankfully, it comes with mercy and grace and a new life and all those things. But I think pastors get very confused about not upsetting the apple cart, so to speak, and they lose sight. And what's really tragic, and I'll just take the gender issue as an example. When a pastor does not say that God created them male and female, and in fact that he's good and you were created exactly as how you were designed, when they don't preach that, we have children who get lured into confusion over their gender because it is truly a social contagion happening in the schools. Kids are spending far more time at school than they are at church. So even if you once in a while hit it, you're not going to do enough to counterculture it. But these guys, without talking about it, we have kids who have absolutely lost complete sight of their gender, gone all the way to the point of mutilating their bodies. Those are victims of us not being willing to speak about something that might be contentious. There are actual victims, and it is not as simple as now we just don't all get along the same way we do. The way we want to. Devastating.
You and I have been involved in this protection of marriage effort politically and otherwise for a lot of years now. And I didn't think about it this way early on in the early 90s when I first started getting involved in this and politics in general. But I think this now quite a bit. I'm convinced that we have gotten rid of one man, one woman marriage in this country. Not because of homosexual activists or even trans activists. Yep. I think it's because of the church. Right. Because we suck at marriage.
That's correct.
The church sucks at marriage.
We don't do enough marriage mentoring, enough talking about it even among...
And listen, heretical teaching on marriage. Correct. So there's this idea that if men will only follow God, then the woman's just going to just come right along. And listen, male leadership's important, obviously, in the marriage relationship. Right. And it does give peace to a wife's heart when her husband is thoughtful and caring and loving towards her. But that does not mean that she's going to follow God. Yep. She has to do that on her own. That's a heretical teaching right there. Exactly. And that's one common one. But when you, and the only non-heresy marriage book, and I'm sure there might be a few others that I've seen in Christian circles, is Love and Respect by Emerson Eggerichs.
Yeah, that's a great one.
That's the only one that I've read that I felt actually hits what Scripture actually does say about marriage. But this whole point I'm making is that the failure of protection of marriage in the country is largely due to a church that does not show an example of marriage that is far superior than what the world provides, that does not show in husband and wife relationships the depth of commitment and even emotional connection to one another that we see in Song of Solomon. Right, between Solomon and his wife there. That is, and by the way, I get on my rant here. I'm sure since we've been Christians, people say that Song of Solomon is an analogy of Christ in the church. And I'm like, these days, okay, well, I think you can do that if you want. There's certainly some application there, but no, that's not what it's about at all. It is literally about marriage. It is literally about romance and even sex in marriage. It's very clear in that regard. And we need that example in culture. The ancient apologist Justin Martyr, who was in the 2nd century AD, he would argue that the example of Christians is what the Roman culture should look at, and the Roman emperor even. Yes. When he's going after Christians, because we obey the laws, we don't kill our children and throw them off into the woods, which was the form of abortion in that day. Yep. In fact, Christians were out saving those children, nurturing them, helping them, and our marriages are good. And he said, we're the example. I don't think he could make that same argument about the church today. And I think that's a real travesty and something that we're not considering as this effort to inject progressivism comes into the church broadly.
I think you're absolutely correct. We have a long way to go to get ourselves back on track.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, as we get towards a closing down time here, we're getting short on time, but I want to get your thoughts about the Trump administration. What do you see as positive? What are maybe even some of the negatives? How does that relate to what the pro-life, pro-family movement really should consider where we're at and where we're going?
Well, I mean, I think we're seeing some great return to some principles, and he's willing to say them out loud. So I think the Trump administration is doing a great favor to all of us by actually just putting on the table the things that we believe and doing it simply and with comfort. It's not, we have all these elected officials that have struggled to say, a male is a male and a female is a female, for example. And so I think that's really important. And then I think as he reduces government, we're going to find that he's reducing the wokeism. He's reducing the DEI, abolishing education. If we can get back to state and local control of education, I think we'll get closer to parents being able to have choice, because again, governance is best when it's governed closest to you. And we don't want the federal government issuing mandates across 50 states that might not work for the 50 states. And so he's doing some really favorable things. And we're watching our universities come back because they're being told they better come back or they're not going to get grants. That is a big deal in Virginia because we have very woke universities. We're watching sports come back because they're told they better get in line. Those things are just fantastic moves. Now, again, 4 years unless we get Congress to put these things into laws. So again, executive orders, what they should be used for, and then whether they don't last. So we really need our Congress to pick up the concepts that he's putting out and take them and put them into the law so that the next president can't just turn them around in an EO.
So as we look at what are some of the challenges and negatives even that you see as we move ahead? So we're getting towards 2026 and the congressional elections are coming. Donald Trump's a lame duck president. Let's just be honest about that. That's the way it is. There are some positives and negatives to that if he does the right things. And as you said, the Congress isn't moving. 2026 is coming down. What do you see some of the challenges moving ahead in years to come and post-Trump?
Well, I think we're going to have to make sure that the movement really believes the same things that you and I believe on life and marriage and family, because if they are attached simply to MAGA and a person, that's not going to carry. So I think the challenge is constructing the movement, not just around the person, but around the actual principles. And that, we see that show up at the local party level. So there's real concerns about making sure that actually allows these principles to last into the next administration, whatever that may be.
No, I agree. And we're going to have to be vigilant in our efforts. We're going to have to continue to grow and build the leaders in our states that are going to continue to fight, both normal folks that come in and do it in a small way and those who are more active. If we do not, then we're not going to be able to sustain this. We could literally go all the way back to where we were in the previous 4 years. I mean, it's really that challenging.
Well, we can't expect our leaders to carry it for us. It's about the people actually engaging. And so it isn't just about, hey, we got this president. And sometimes people sit back, or, hey, I got this governor at a state level. It is to be sustainable. It is about all of us being vigilant all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and people forget that the preamble to the Constitution is part of the legal aspect of the Constitution. And it starts out, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. This is the idea of popular sovereignty. And we don't understand that the king, the sovereign of our nation, is the people.
That's right.
We just have a set of constructs within the Constitution that limit those representatives to do just certain things which they are not constrained to at present. Right. But that they must answer to us and we are not in any way required to answer to them except through the rule of law. Yes. And that is really something that we need to reinstitute both in the church, but in the populace as a whole. And that's one of our big challenges. Well, before I let you go, Victoria, tell people a little bit of a quick summary of what the Family Foundation of Virginia is about, how they can get a hold of you, and how they can get involved if they're in the Virginia area.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, we're focused on state and local more than we are federal. So for folks that have an interest in what's going on in Virginia, our website's the easiest, just familyfoundation.org, because that's where you're going to really find out all about us. But again, we're known for our advocacy at the state level. We're known for our grassroots engagement at these local school boards. So folks that are wrestling through, how do parents have a say in their school board? And then we have a law center, Founding Freedoms Law Center, and we actually litigate directly on these matters, which sometimes it requires us to actually, when they pass unconstitutional laws, we have to either reverse them through the legislature or we have to take them to court with a plaintiff that so a judge can say, no, this is completely in violation of someone's, constitutional rights, like religious freedom.
Great. So again, people need to go to familyfoundation.org to find out how they can get in contact with you. And yes, if they're in Virginia, they definitely need to get involved with what you're doing. Victoria, I just appreciate you, my friend, and spend a little time with us. And we'll definitely want to do this again sometime in the future. But thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, before we get to some closing comments with Victoria Cobb of Family Foundation of Virginia, by the way, we're going to kind of touch on the Trump administration and what her thoughts are on that and where things go from here. I wanted to encourage you again to like and subscribe to our podcast or on YouTube or wherever you're getting this. And I'm really appreciative for you listening to us and sharing in the information we're trying to give. Again, we want to know what you'd like to hear. So definitely email us at info@conservativeusa.org and let us know what you think. Check the show notes. There'll be information on there that you can use to help you get more information about our guests and more information about the podcast itself so that you can see what might interest you and learn further. So also share this with a friend who might be interested. Make sure that you let everybody know that we're doing this. I think it's going to be a great resource for you and your friends. Please share it around.